The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as James Morrison began his daily rounds. He had been a palace guard for 12 years, and nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. The sound of his polished boots echoed through the empty corridors as he walked past the portraits of long-dead royals, their painted eyes seeming to follow his every move. James was a man of routine. Every morning at 6 sharp he would start his security check from the East Wing, moving methodically through each room, ensuring everything was in its proper place. The palace staff knew him well, a quiet man in his 40s with graying temples and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. His colleagues often joked that he could spot a dust mote out of place from 50 feet away. This particular Tuesday morning felt different, though James couldn't put his finger on why. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The palace was preparing for Princess Charlotte's upcoming 18th birthday celebration, and everyone was on edge. The young princess had grown from a playful child into a poised young woman, beloved by the public and admired by the press. As James approached the princess's private quarters, he noticed something unusual. The door to her walk-in wardrobe stood slightly ajar. This was odd because the princess was known for her meticulous nature, inherited from her mother, Catherine. Everything in Charlotte's life had a place, and everything was kept in its place. The princess had left for her morning riding lesson an hour ago, and her personal maid, Mrs. Henderson, wouldn't arrive until 8. James hesitated for a moment. Protocol dictated that he shouldn't enter the princess's private spaces without permission, but his duty as a security officer overrode personal boundaries when something seemed amiss. He knocked gently on the wardrobe door, calling out softly, "Security check, Your Royal Highness." When no response came, he pushed the door open wider. The wardrobe was a room unto itself, larger than most people's bedrooms. Rows of designer gowns hung in perfect formation, organized by color and season. Shelves lined the walls, displaying an impressive collection of shoes, handbags, and jewelry boxes. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over everything, making the room feel more like a luxury boutique than a storage space. But something was wrong. James's trained eye immediately spotted the disturbance. In the far corner of the room, behind a section of ball gowns, something dark lay crumpled on the floor. His heart rate quickened as he approached, his hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped to his belt. What he found made his blood run cold. There, partially hidden beneath a fallen evening gown, was a dress unlike any he had seen in the princess's collection. It was deep burgundy, almost black, made of what appeared to be expensive silk. But it wasn't the dress itself that shocked him. It was its condition. The dress was torn in several places, with jagged rips running down the bodice and skirt. Dark stains covered the fabric, stains that looked suspiciously like blood. The dress had been hastily stuffed behind the other garments, as if someone had tried to hide it quickly. James felt his mouth go dry as he realized the implications of what he was looking at. His mind raced through possibilities. Had there been an accident? An attack? Was the princess hurt? But he had just seen her that morning, riding her horse across the palace grounds, looking perfectly healthy and happy. So whose blood was on this dress, and why was it hidden in Princess Charlotte's wardrobe? James knew he had to act quickly, but he also knew he had to be careful. Royal scandals had a way of spiraling out of control, destroying reputations and careers in their wake. He couldn't risk contaminating what might be a crime scene, but he also couldn't risk word of this getting out before the proper authorities could investigate. With steady hands, he photographed the dress from multiple angles using his secure phone, being careful not to disturb its position. The images were automatically uploaded to the palace's secure server, creating a timestamp and backup that couldn't be altered or deleted. Then, he carefully backed out of the wardrobe, making sure not to touch anything else. His next call was to his supervisor, Chief Security Officer Margaret Walsh. Walsh had been with the Royal Protection Service for over 20 years and had seen everything from assassination attempts to embarrassing family feuds. If anyone knew how to handle this delicate situation, it would be her. "Margaret, we have a situation," James said into his radio, using their coded language. "I need you in the princess's quarters immediately. And, Margaret, bring the sealing kit." The sealing kit was used only in the most serious situations, when evidence needed to be preserved and access completely restricted. In his 12 years of service, James had never used it. The weight of that decision pressed down on him as he stood guard outside the wardrobe, ensuring no one else could enter. Minutes felt like hours as he waited for Margaret to arrive. His mind kept returning to the dress, trying to piece together what could have happened. The princess had a busy social schedule, attending various charity events and royal functions. Could something have happened at one of these events? Had someone attacked her, and she had hidden the evidence to avoid a scandal? The sound of approaching footsteps snapped him back to attention. Margaret Walsh appeared around the corner, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She was a formidable woman, standing nearly 6 feet tall with the bearing of a former military officer. Behind her came Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the palace's private physician, and Thomas Hartwell, the head of palace communications. "Show me," Margaret said without preamble. James led them to the wardrobe, explaining exactly what he had found and the steps he had taken to preserve the scene. Margaret examined the photographs on his phone, her expression growing grimmer with each image. "Has anyone else seen this?" she asked. "No one," James confirmed. "I've been standing guard since I found it." Dr. Morrison stepped forward, studying the photographs with a clinical eye. "Those stains, they do appear to be blood. Fresh blood. I'd say no more than a day or two old. And the pattern suggests—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It suggests violence of some kind." Thomas Hartwell looked pale as he absorbed this information. As head of communications, his job was to manage the royal family's public image, and this situation was his worst nightmare. "We need to contain this immediately," he said. "If word gets out, first things first," Margaret interrupted. "We need to secure the scene and begin a proper investigation. James, you did the right thing calling me immediately. We're going to seal this wardrobe until we can determine what happened here." The sealing process was methodical and thorough. Special tape was applied to the wardrobe doors, tape that would show if anyone tried to tamper with it. A security camera was installed to monitor the area continuously. Access logs were created, documenting everyone who had been in the vicinity and when. As they worked, James couldn't help but think about Princess Charlotte. She would be returning from her riding lessons soon, expecting to prepare for her afternoon appointments. How would they explain why her wardrobe was sealed? More importantly, what role did she play in whatever had happened here? Margaret seemed to read his thoughts. "We'll need to speak with the princess as soon as she returns," she said quietly. "This conversation needs to happen before she discovers what we've found." The waiting was the hardest part. They positioned themselves in the princess's sitting room, a comfortable space decorated in soft pastels with family photographs scattered on the side tables. James found himself studying a recent photo of Charlotte with her brothers, George and Louis, all of them laughing at some shared joke. The princess looked so young and innocent in the picture, nothing like someone who could be involved in whatever violent incident had left blood on that hidden dress. The sound of approaching voices in the corridor signaled Charlotte's return. James heard her distinctive laugh, followed by her thanking someone, probably her riding instructor or one of her protection officers. Margaret straightened in her chair, preparing for what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of her career. Princess Charlotte entered the sitting room still wearing her riding clothes, her cheeks flushed from the morning air. She was tall for her age, with her father's height and her mother's elegant bearing. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her blue eyes sparkled with the joy that came from a morning spent with her beloved horses. "Good morning," she said brightly, then paused as she took in the serious faces of the group waiting for her. "Is everything all right? You all look rather grave." Margaret stood up, her years of diplomatic training evident in her calm demeanor. "Your Royal Highness, we need to speak with you about something rather urgent. Please, have a seat." Charlotte's expression shifted from cheerful to concerned as she settled into her favorite armchair. "Has something happened to someone in the family?" "Everyone is fine," Margaret assured her quickly. "But we have discovered something in your wardrobe that requires explanation." As Margaret began to describe what James had found, Charlotte's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, and then something that looked almost like fear. When Margaret showed her the photographs on James's phone, the princess's face went completely white. "I don't understand," Charlotte said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never seen this dress before in my life. James studied her reaction carefully. Either Princess Charlotte was an exceptional actress, or she was genuinely shocked by the discovery. Her surprise seemed authentic, but years of security work had taught him that people could hide the truth behind convincing performances. Are you certain? Margaret pressed gently. Take a closer look at the photographs. The dress appears to be expensive, the kind that would be worn to a formal event. Charlotte leaned forward, studying the images more closely. As she did, James noticed her hands were trembling slightly. The fabric looks familiar, she admitted slowly. It reminds me of something, but I can't place what. Dr. Morrison spoke up for the first time. Your Royal Highness, I need to ask you directly, are you injured in any way? Have you been hurt recently? No, Charlotte replied immediately. I mean, I have the usual bumps and bruises from riding, but nothing serious. Why would you ask that? The stains on the dress appear to be blood, Dr. Morrison explained carefully. If you were injured... It's not my blood, Charlotte interrupted, her voice growing stronger. I would know if I had bled that much, and I've never owned a dress like that. My clothes are all catalogued by Mrs. Henderson. You can check her records. Margaret made a note to do exactly that. The palace kept meticulous records of all royal clothing purchases, both for security reasons and for tax purposes. If the dress wasn't in those records, it raised even more questions about how it had ended up in Charlotte's wardrobe. Think carefully, Thomas Hartwell said, speaking for the first time. Have you noticed anything unusual recently? Anyone behaving strangely around you? Any events where something might have happened that you didn't report? Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she shook her head. Nothing comes to mind. My schedule has been normal. Charity events, family dinners, riding lessons. I can't think of anything out of the ordinary. But James noticed something in her eyes. A flicker of uncertainty that suggested she might be holding something back. It wasn't uncommon for members of the royal family to be protective of their privacy, even when faced with serious situations. Sometimes they needed time to process before they were ready to share everything they knew. Margaret stood up, signaling that the initial questioning was over. Your Royal Highness, we're going to need to keep your wardrobe sealed while we investigate this matter further. Mrs. Henderson can arrange for you to access clothing from other sources in the meantime. Of course, Charlotte replied, though she looked troubled. Will this become public knowledge? Not if we can help it, Thomas assured her, but we need to get to the bottom of what happened here. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, so it's better that we control the narrative from the beginning. As the meeting concluded, James remained behind to finalize the security arrangements for the sealed wardrobe. He watched as Princess Charlotte left the room, noting how her shoulders sagged once she thought she was out of sight. Whatever had happened, it was clear that this discovery had shaken her more than she was letting on. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Forensics experts arrived discreetly through the palace's private entrances, dressed as maintenance workers, to avoid attracting attention. They would analyze the dress, the bloodstains, and any other evidence that might help explain what had happened. Mrs. Garay Henderson, Charlotte's personal maid, was questioned about the dress and confirmed that it wasn't part of the princess's official wardrobe. She was visibly upset by the news, having prided herself on knowing every item in Charlotte's collection down to the smallest accessory. By lunchtime, the initial investigation was underway, but more questions had emerged than answers. The blood on the dress was human, but they wouldn't know if it belonged to Charlotte or someone else until DNA tests were completed. The dress itself was expensive, possibly designer, but carried no labels or identifying marks that might indicate where it was purchased. Most puzzling of all was how the dress had ended up in Charlotte's wardrobe in the first place. The princess's quarters were among the most secure areas of the palace, with multiple layers of protection including key card access, security cameras, and regular patrols. For someone to hide evidence there would require either incredible skill or inside knowledge of palace security procedures. As James completed his incident report, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever had happened, whatever secrets that blood-stained dress held, they were about to turn the palace upside down. And Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered if Princess Charlotte knew more about this mysterious dress than she was willing to admit. The afternoon brought new developments that would change everything, but for now, the wardrobe remained sealed, its secrets locked away behind security tape and constant surveillance, while investigators worked to uncover the truth behind the hidden torn dress that had shattered the morning calm of Kensington Palace. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Kensington Palace. Detective Inspector Sarah Coleman from Scotland Yard's Special Crimes Unit arrived through the private entrance, her unmarked car blending seamlessly with the stream of delivery vehicles that serviced the palace daily. She was a woman in her early 40s, with sharp features and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. Margaret Walsh met her at the security checkpoint, personally escorting her through the maze of corridors that led to the sealed wardrobe. Coleman had been chosen for this assignment not just because of her excellent track record in solving complex cases, but because of her absolute discretion. She had worked on several sensitive cases involving high-profile families, and her ability to conduct investigations without attracting media attention was legendary. "Fill me in on everything," Coleman said as they walked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. Margaret briefed her on the morning's discoveries, James's initial response, and the preliminary findings from the forensics team. When they reached the princess's quarters, Coleman examined the sealed wardrobe with the methodical approach of an experienced investigator. She studied James's photographs, reviewed the security footage from the surrounding corridors, and questioned everyone who had access to this section of the palace. "The blood patterns are interesting," she observed, pointing to specific areas on the photographs. "This isn't consistent with a simple accident. The way it's distributed suggests struggle, possibly violence. And the tears in the fabric, they're not random. Someone or something caused significant damage to this dress." Dr. Bruce Morrison, who had remained at the palace to assist with the investigation, nodded in agreement. "The preliminary tests confirm it's human blood, type O negative. We're waiting for DNA results, but that could take several days even with our expedited process." Coleman made notes in a small leather notebook, her handwriting neat and precise. "What about the dress itself? Any leads on where it came from?" Thomas Hartwell stepped forward, looking more haggard than he had that morning. "We've been in contact with several high-end boutiques and designers that the princess frequents. None of them recognize the dress from our photographs." "It's possible it was purchased elsewhere, or what?" Coleman prompted. "Or it belonged to someone else entirely," Hartwell finished reluctantly. This possibility had been hanging over the investigation like a dark cloud. If the dress didn't belong to Princess Charlotte, then someone had deliberately placed it in her wardrobe. The implications were staggering. It could be an attempt to frame her for whatever crime the blood evidence represented, or worse, it could mean that Charlotte had witnessed something terrible and someone was trying to silence her. Coleman spent the next several hours interviewing palace staff individually. She spoke with guards who had been on duty the previous night, housekeeping staff who had access to the royal quarters, and anyone else who might have seen or heard something unusual. Her questions were probing but diplomatic, designed to extract information without causing panic among the palace employees. The picture that emerged was troubling. Several staff members reported seeing unfamiliar faces in the palace over the past few days, people they assumed were connected to preparations for Charlotte's birthday celebration. The guest list for the upcoming party included hundreds of names, from foreign dignitaries to entertainment industry figures, and advanced security checks had brought numerous personnel into the palace. Mrs. Henderson, Charlotte's maid, was particularly helpful in establishing a timeline. "The princess attended the Children's Hospital Charity Gala on Sunday evening," she explained. "She wore the blue Valentino gown. I remember because she specifically requested it. She returned home around midnight, and I helped her out of the dress before she went to bed." "Did she seem upset about anything?" Coleman asked. "Any indication that something had happened at the gala?" Mrs. Henderson considered this carefully. "She did seem quieter than usual when she came home. I assume she was tired. These events can be quite draining. But now that you mention it, she did ask me to check that all her doors were locked before I left that night. That was unusual for her." This detail sent a chill through the investigation team. If Charlotte had felt the need to ensure her security was tight, it suggested she might have felt threatened or at risk. Coleman made a note to obtain a complete guest list and security footage from Sunday's charity gala. As the afternoon wore on, more pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. The forensics team discovered something that had initially been missed: a small piece of torn fabric caught on one of the wardrobe's door hinges. The fabric didn't match the blood-stained dress, but rather appeared to be from a man's jacket or shirt. This suggests that whoever placed the dress in the wardrobe was in a hurry, Coleman explained to the assembled team. They caught their clothing on the hinge and didn't notice, or didn't have time to retrieve the evidence. The fabric was immediately sent for analysis. If they could identify the source of the material, the manufacturer, the style, even the approximate age, it might provide a crucial lead in identifying the perpetrator. Meanwhile, Palace security was reviewing hours of CCTV footage from the corridors surrounding Charlotte's quarters. The Palace's security system was extensive, with cameras covering virtually every public area. However, the royal family's private quarters had fewer cameras to preserve their privacy, creating potential blind spots that someone familiar with the layout might exploit. James Morrison found himself at the center of the investigation, not as a suspect, but as a key witness whose attention to detail and quick thinking had preserved crucial evidence. Coleman interviewed him extensively, going over every moment from his discovery of the dress to the sealing of the wardrobe. "You've worked here for 12 years, Coleman said. In your experience, how difficult would it be for someone unfamiliar with the palace to access the princess's wardrobe? James considered this carefully. "Nearly impossible without help from someone on the inside," he replied. "The security protocols are extensive. You need proper identification, escort clearance, and most areas require key cards that are tracked and logged. Someone would have had to know exactly where they were going and how to get there without being detected." This revelation narrowed the field of suspects considerably. Whoever had planted the dress either had legitimate access to the palace or had received help from someone who did. The investigation would now focus on identifying anyone with both access and motive. Late in the afternoon, Princess Charlotte requested a private meeting with Detective Inspector Coleman. They met in the princess's private study, a cozy room filled with books and family photographs. Charlotte had changed from her riding clothes into a simple sweater and jeans, looking more like a typical teenager than a member of the royal family. "I've been thinking about what happened," Charlotte began, her voice steady but quiet. "There's something I didn't mention this morning because I wasn't sure if it was relevant." Coleman leaned forward, giving the princess her full attention. "Please, tell me everything. Even details that seem unimportant could be crucial." Charlotte took a deep breath before continuing. "At Sunday's charity gala, something strange happened. I was speaking with some donors when a woman approached me. She was elegantly dressed, probably in her 30s, with dark hair. She said she had something important to tell me about my family." "Did she give you her name?" "She said her name was Victoria, but when I asked my protection officer to check the guest list later, there was no Victoria registered for the event. She claimed she had information about my grandmother, my father's mother. That would interest me. She said there were secrets about the royal family that I deserved to know." Coleman made careful notes as Charlotte spoke. "How did you respond?" "I was polite but skeptical. People often approach us with wild claims or conspiracy theories. But there was something about her that seemed genuine, I suppose. She wasn't seeking attention or trying to cause a scene. She seemed genuinely concerned about something." "Did she give you any specifics about these supposed secrets?" Charlotte shook her head. "She said it wasn't safe to discuss it at the gala, with so many people around. She asked if we could meet privately to discuss it further. I told her that would be difficult to arrange, and she seemed to understand. But as she left, she said something strange." "What did she say?" "She said, 'Be careful who you trust, Your Highness. Sometimes the danger comes from those closest to us.' Then she disappeared into the crowd, and I didn't see her again for the rest of the evening." This encounter took on new significance in light of the morning's discovery. Could this mysterious Victoria be connected to the blood-stained dress? Was she trying to warn Charlotte about something? Or was she part of whatever conspiracy had led to evidence being planted in the princess's wardrobe? Coleman immediately requested that palace security provide all available footage from Sunday's charity gala. If they could identify this woman Victoria, they might have their first real lead in understanding what was happening. As evening approached, the DNA results arrived from the laboratory. Morrison delivered the news to the assembled investigation team with grave concern. "The blood on the dress does not belong to Princess Charlotte," she announced. "However, it does match samples in the police database." The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. Coleman was the first to speak. "Whose blood is it?" Dr. Morrison consulted her notes. "It belongs to a woman named Amanda Stevens, age 28, a freelance journalist who has been reported missing by her family. She was last seen 3 days ago." The case had just taken a dramatic turn. What had started as a mysterious discovery in a princess's wardrobe had become a potential kidnapping or murder investigation. Amanda Stevens' disappearance had been reported to police, but as an adult who traveled frequently for work, the initial response had been routine rather than urgent. Coleman immediately contacted her colleagues at Scotland Yard to gather all available information about Amanda Stevens. The missing person report revealed that Amanda had been working on a story about the royal family, specifically investigating claims about historical scandals that certain parties wanted to keep buried. The connection to the mysterious Victoria from the charity gala was becoming clearer. If Amanda Stevens had been investigating royal family secrets, and if Victoria had been trying to warn Princess Charlotte about danger, then the blood-stained dress might be a message, or worse, evidence of what happened to a journalist who got too close to the truth. Palace security was immediately increased, with additional protection officers assigned to all members of the royal family. The investigation was no longer just about a mysterious dress. It was about protecting Charlotte from whoever had committed violence against Amanda Stevens and was now trying to implicate the princess in the crime. Thomas Hartwell faced the unenviable task of managing the situation without alerting the media. Amanda Stevens' disappearance hadn't yet received significant press attention, but if word leaked that evidence connected to her case had been found at the palace, the story would explode across every front page in the country. As the day ended, the sealed wardrobe remained under constant guard, while forensics experts continued their analysis. The torn fabric found on the door hinge was being compared to clothing worn by everyone with palace access. Security footage from multiple locations was being reviewed frame by frame to identify any suspicious activity. Princess Charlotte was moved to a more secure wing of the palace, with her movements restricted and monitored for her own protection. She cooperated fully with these measures, understanding that her safety might depend on solving the mystery of the blood-stained dress quickly. Detective Inspector Coleman worked late into the night, coordinating with multiple law enforcement agencies and reviewing every piece of evidence they had gathered. The investigation was moving quickly, but she had a growing sense that time was running out. Whoever had planted the dress in Charlotte's wardrobe had done so for a reason, and she suspected that reason was only the beginning of a larger plan. The palace, usually a place of protocol and tradition, had become the center of a criminal investigation that threatened to expose secrets some people were willing to kill to protect. As Coleman reviewed her notes one final time before heading home, she couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous part of this case was still ahead of them. Amanda Stevens' blood on a hidden dress was just the first clue in what was shaping up to be a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of British society. And Princess Charlotte, whether she realized it or not, was standing directly in the center of the storm that was about to break. The next morning brought a breakthrough that would change everything. Detective Inspector Coleman arrived at the palace before dawn, having spent most of the night reviewing security footage from the charity gala. What she discovered in those hours of digital surveillance would unravel a conspiracy that had been months in the making. The woman who had approached Princess Charlotte, the one calling herself Victoria, had been captured on multiple cameras throughout the evening. Coleman's team had used facial recognition software to identify her as Victoria Ashworth, a former palace employee who had been dismissed 18 months earlier under mysterious circumstances. "Tell me about Victoria Ashworth," Coleman said to Margaret Walsh as they reviewed the personnel files in the security office. The morning light streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the desk covered with documents and photographs. Margaret's expression grew troubled as she pulled up Ashworth's employment record on her computer. She worked in the communications department under Thomas Hartwell for about 2 years. Officially, she resigned to pursue other opportunities. Unofficially, Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. "Unofficially?" Coleman prompted. She was let go because she was caught accessing files that were well above her clearance level. Royal family financial records, private correspondence, historical documents that are normally restricted to senior staff only. When confronted, she claimed she was conducting research for a legitimate project, but no one could verify that claim. This information cast Victoria Ashworth's approach to Princess Charlotte in an entirely new light. If she had been stealing sensitive information during her time at the palace, her warning about family secrets took on a more sinister meaning. She hadn't been trying to protect Charlotte. She had been probing for more information. Coleman studied Ashworth's photograph, noting the woman's sharp features and intelligent eyes. "Do we know what she's been doing since leaving the palace?" "That's where it gets interesting," Margaret replied, pulling up another file. "According to our background check when we hired her, she had previously worked for several high-profile public relations firms. But after leaving the palace, she seems to have disappeared from the usual professional networks. No employment records, no known address, no social media presence." The pattern was becoming clear to Coleman. Victoria Ashworth had likely been planted at the palace as a spy, gathering information for unknown parties. When her activities were discovered, she had gone underground, continuing her work from the shadows. Her approach to Charlotte at the charity gala might have been an attempt to gather more intelligence, or to recruit the princess as an unwitting source of information. But where did Amanda Stevens fit into this picture? Coleman's team had been investigating the missing journalist's background and had discovered some troubling connections. Amanda had recently been in contact with several former palace employees, apparently investigating a story about corruption within the royal household. Dr. Morrison joined them in the security office, carrying a folder of lab results. "We have more information about the bloodstains," she announced. "The pattern analysis suggests that the bleeding occurred elsewhere and the dress was moved to its hiding place afterward. But there's something else. We found traces of a sedative drug in the blood samples." "What kind of sedative?" Coleman asked. "Rohypnol, commonly known as a date rape drug. The concentration suggests that whoever this blood belonged to was heavily sedated when the bleeding occurred." This revelation painted an even darker picture of what had happened to Amanda Stevens. If she had been drugged and then injured, it suggested a premeditated attack rather than a crime of opportunity. The fact that evidence of this attack had been planted in Princess Charlotte's wardrobe indicated that someone wanted the princess to be implicated in whatever had happened to the journalist. Coleman's phone buzzed with an urgent message from her team at Scotland Yard. They had found Amanda Stevens' apartment, and what they discovered there would add another layer to the mystery. Coleman excused herself to take the call, speaking in hushed tones as she received the update. When she returned to the group, her expression was grim. "Amanda Stevens' apartment has been ransacked. Her computer is missing, along with all of her research materials and files." But the neighbors reported seeing a woman matching Victoria Ashworth's description leaving the building on the night Amanda disappeared. The connection between the missing journalist and the former palace employee was no longer circumstantial. Coleman now had a clear suspect in Amanda's disappearance, but the motive remained unclear. What had Amanda Stevens been investigating that was worth kidnapping her for? And why frame Princess Charlotte for the crime? Thomas Hartwell, who had been quietly listening to the briefing, suddenly looked pale. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something about Victoria Ashworth that I haven't mentioned." All eyes turned to him as he struggled to find the words. "When Victoria was working here, she became obsessed with Princess Charlotte. At first, we thought it was just professional dedication. She was always volunteering to work on projects related to the princess's public appearances and charity work. But it became uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable how?" Coleman asked. She knew details about Charlotte's personal life that she shouldn't have had access to. Her daily schedule, her private preferences, even family conversations that should have been confidential. "We suspected she was somehow accessing private information, but we could never prove it." Margaret added, "That's actually why we started monitoring her computer access more closely. We suspected she might be passing information to tabloid journalists or other unauthorized parties." The picture was becoming clearer, but it was also becoming more frightening. Victoria Ashworth had been obsessed with Princess Charlotte even before leaving the palace. If Amanda Stevens had been investigating royal family secrets and had somehow connected with Ashworth, she might have stumbled into a dangerous situation. Coleman decided it was time to speak with Princess Charlotte again, this time armed with much more specific questions about her interactions with Victoria Ashworth. They met in the same study as before, but this time Charlotte seemed more anxious, as if she sensed the gravity of what was unfolding around her. "I want to show you a photograph," Coleman said, sliding a picture of Victoria Ashworth across the desk. "Do you recognize this woman?" Charlotte studied the image carefully, her brow furrowing in concentration. Yes, that's Victoria from the charity gala. But she paused, looking more closely at the photograph. Actually, I think I've seen her before, not just at the gala. Where else have you seen her? I'm not entirely certain, but I think she might have been at other events over the past few months. There was a gallery opening in September, and I remember seeing someone who looked like her in the crowd, and possibly at the horse show in October. At the time, I assumed she was connected to one of the organizations we support, but now that I think about it, she never seemed to be with any particular group. This suggested that Victoria Ashworth had been stalking Princess Charlotte for months, attending public events to observe and possibly approach her. The charity gala might not have been their first encounter, but rather the culmination of a long campaign to make contact. Did she ever try to speak with you at these other events? Coleman asked. Charlotte shook her head. Not that I remember. But there's something else. I think she might have sent me letters. What kind of letters? Over the past few months, I've received several anonymous letters that seemed to know details about my private life. They weren't threatening exactly, but they were personal in a way that made me uncomfortable. They mentioned things like my favorite riding routes or books I was reading, things that hadn't been publicized. Coleman felt a chill run down her spine. Do you still have these letters? I gave them to my protection officer, Chief Inspector Reynolds. I assumed you would handle them through normal security channels. Coleman immediately summoned Chief Inspector Reynolds to join them. When he arrived, his expression suggested he knew why he had been called. I was wondering when you'd ask about those letters, he said. I've been conducting a discreet investigation into their source, but I haven't been able to trace them. Why didn't you report this earlier? Coleman asked, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. The letters weren't explicitly threatening, and Princess Charlotte receives a great deal of correspondence from admiring members of the public. We try to handle these situations without causing alarm, unless there's a clear and present danger. Reynolds produced a file containing photocopies of the letters Charlotte had received. As Coleman read through them, she felt increasingly disturbed by their content. The letters were written in elegant handwriting and spoke of admiration for Charlotte's charity work and public service, but they also contained references to private conversations and personal details that no member of the public should have known. One letter, dated just 2 weeks earlier, was particularly troubling. Your Royal Highness, I hope you are well, and that your morning rides continue to bring you peace. I noticed you've been reading The Secret Garden again. It was always one of your favorites, wasn't it? I worry sometimes that you don't realize how many people are watching you. People who don't have your best interests at heart. Please be careful, and remember that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. The letter was signed simply, "A Friend Who Cares." This isn't fan mail, Coleman said grimly. This is harassment, possibly even stalking. And if Victoria Ashworth wrote these letters, it suggests her obsession with Princess Charlotte is much more serious than we initially thought. The investigation was taking on new urgency. If Ashworth was indeed stalking Charlotte, and had also been connected to Amanda Stevens' disappearance, then the princess might be in immediate danger. The planted dress might not just be an attempt to frame her for a crime, it might be part of a larger plan to harm or manipulate her. Coleman's team worked throughout the morning to piece together more of Victoria Ashworth's activities since leaving the palace. They discovered that she had been renting a small flat under a false name in a neighborhood known for its transient population. When police searched the apartment, they found disturbing evidence of her obsession with Princess Charlotte. The walls were covered with photographs of the princess taken at various public events, some clearly taken with long-range lenses from considerable distances. There were detailed schedules of Charlotte's public appearances, maps of the routes she typically took while riding, and even floor plans of parts of Kensington Palace that Ashworth wouldn't have had legitimate access to during her employment. Most disturbing of all was a journal filled with detailed observations about Charlotte's behavior, relationships, and daily routines. The entries revealed a woman whose fascination with the princess had crossed the line into dangerous obsession months earlier. But the apartment also revealed something else. Evidence that Amanda Stevens had been there recently. The missing journalist's business cards were found in a trash bin, along with notes in Ashworth's handwriting that mentioned stopping the investigation and protecting Charlotte from the truth. This suggested that Amanda Stevens might have gotten close to exposing Victoria Ashworth's activities and that her disappearance was connected to silencing her investigation. But it also raised troubling questions about Ashworth's motivations. If she was obsessed with Princess Charlotte, why would she plant evidence that would incriminate her? What did she hope to accomplish? The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Anderson, Charlotte's maid, contacted Coleman with information she had remembered from her early days working with the princess. When Victoria Ashworth worked at the palace, she said, "I noticed that she often found excuses to be in areas where Princess Charlotte spent time. She would volunteer for tasks that would put her in contact with the princess's schedule or personal effects." Did Princess Charlotte ever comment on this? Once, she mentioned that there was a woman from the communications department who seemed to know a lot about her personal preferences. The princess found it a bit odd but assumed it was just someone being thorough in their work. This detail suggested that Victoria Ashworth's plan might be more complex than simply framing Charlotte for Amanda's disappearance. If she was truly obsessed with the princess, she might be trying to create a situation where she could position herself as Charlotte's protector or confidant. The planted dress might be intended to create a crisis that would require Charlotte to depend on someone for help, someone who could present themselves as uniquely qualified to assist her. It was a twisted form of manipulation that Coleman had encountered in other stalking cases, where the perpetrator creates problems they can then solve to gain the victim's trust and dependence. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Coleman realized that they were dealing with someone whose mental state had deteriorated significantly since leaving the palace. Victoria Ashworth's obsession with Princess Charlotte had consumed her life, leading her to commit increasingly serious crimes in pursuit of her twisted goals. But the most frightening aspect of the case was that they still didn't know where Amanda Stevens was or what condition she was in. The blood on the dress proved that she had been injured, possibly seriously, and time was running out to find her before it was too late. Coleman gathered her team for an urgent briefing as the afternoon wore on. They had identified their suspect and understood her motivations, but they still needed to locate both Victoria Ashworth and Amanda Stevens before the situation escalated further. "Ashworth is desperate," Coleman told her assembled officers. "Her obsession with Princess Charlotte has already driven her to kidnapping and assault. If she feels cornered, she might do something even more dangerous. We need to find her before she makes another move." The search for Victoria Ashworth and Amanda Stevens intensified as the afternoon progressed. Detective Inspector Coleman coordinated with multiple law enforcement agencies, setting up surveillance on locations connected to Ashworth's past and monitoring communication channels that might reveal her current whereabouts. The break they had been waiting for came from an unexpected source. A security guard at a storage facility on the outskirts of London contacted police after recognizing Victoria Ashworth's photograph from a bulletin that had been circulated to area businesses. He reported that a woman matching her description had been accessing a storage unit regularly over the past few weeks, often arriving at unusual hours. Coleman immediately dispatched a team to the storage facility, while she remained at the palace to coordinate the operation and protect Princess Charlotte. The facility was located in an industrial area known for its anonymity, the perfect place for someone to hide evidence or even keep a victim concealed. When police arrived at the storage facility, they found the guard waiting nervously by the entrance. "She was here yesterday evening," he told the officers. "Stayed for about an hour, which is longer than usual. I remember thinking it was odd because she usually just goes in for a few minutes." The storage unit was located in a back corner of the facility, away from the main thoroughfares where other customers might notice unusual activity. As police approached the unit, they could hear sounds coming from inside, muffled noises that might have been human voices. The unit was secured with a heavy padlock, but police had come prepared with cutting equipment. As they worked to gain entry, the sounds from inside became more distinct. Someone was definitely inside, and they appeared to be in distress. When the door finally rolled open, the scene that greeted the officers was both shocking and relieving. Amanda Stevens was inside the unit, alive but bound and clearly injured. She was conscious but weak, with dried blood on her clothing that matched the stains found on the dress in Princess Charlotte's wardrobe. "Help me," Amanda whispered as paramedics rushed to her aid. "She's coming back. Victoria, she's planning something terrible." As medical personnel worked to stabilize Amanda, she managed to provide crucial information about her ordeal. Victoria Ashworth had indeed kidnapped her, but not just to stop her investigation. Amanda had been researching historical scandals involving the royal family, but she had stumbled upon something much more recent and dangerous. Victoria's obsession with Princess Charlotte. She's been watching the princess for months, Amanda told Coleman Weekly as she was prepared for transport to the hospital. She has detailed plans, wants to get close to her, thinks she's protecting her from some imaginary threat. The most chilling revelation came when Amanda described what Victoria had told her during her captivity. She said the dress, placing it in the princess's wardrobe, was just the beginning. She wanted to create a situation where Charlotte would need help, where she would be vulnerable and isolated. Coleman felt ice in her veins as she realized the full scope of Victoria's plan. The planted dress wasn't meant to frame Princess Charlotte for Amanda's disappearance. It was meant to create a crisis that would require external help to resolve. Victoria was positioning herself to be that help, to present herself as someone with inside knowledge who could protect the princess from false accusations. It was a sophisticated form of psychological manipulation known as white knight syndrome, where the perpetrator creates problems they can then solve to gain the victim's trust and dependence. In Victoria's twisted mind, she was helping Princess Charlotte by creating a situation where they would be brought together. Back at the palace, Coleman immediately shared this information with Margaret Walsh and the protection team. Princess Charlotte's security was elevated to the highest possible level, with armed officers positioned throughout her living quarters, and a complete review of everyone with palace access. But even as they increased security measures, Coleman knew that Victoria Ashworth was still out there, and her plan was likely not yet complete. The discovery of Amanda Stevens would only make her more desperate and unpredictable. Princess Charlotte was informed about Amanda's rescue and the true nature of the threat against her. Despite her youth, she handled the news with remarkable composure, though Coleman could see the fear in her eyes as she absorbed the reality of being stalked by someone with such dangerous delusions. "What happens now?" Charlotte asked during their meeting. "How do we catch her?" "We're using every resource at our disposal," Coleman assured her. "But we need you to be extremely careful. Don't deviate from approved schedules, and report anything unusual, no matter how small it might seem." The investigation took another turn when Amanda Stevens, from her hospital bed, provided additional details about Victoria's activities. During her captivity, Victoria had talked extensively about her time at the palace and her growing obsession with Charlotte. "She believes she has a special connection with the princess," Amanda told Coleman during her bedside interview. "She thinks Charlotte is in danger from people within the royal family itself." She mentioned secrets and conspiracies that she claimed to have discovered during her time working there. This revelation suggested that Victoria's mental state was even more unstable than they had initially realized. She wasn't just stalking Princess Charlotte. She had constructed an elaborate fantasy where she was the princess's protector against imaginary threats. Amanda also revealed that Victoria had shown her detailed plans for future approaches to the princess. She had schedules, maps, even photographs of areas around the palace where she thought she could intercept Charlotte during her daily activities. She was planning to stage some kind of encounter where she could rescue the princess from a fabricated danger. Coleman immediately shared this information with palace security, and they began identifying potential vulnerability points in Charlotte's routine. The princess's daily rides were particularly concerning, as they took her outside the palace walls into areas that would be difficult to secure completely. The manhunt for Victoria Ashworth intensified throughout the evening. Her photograph was distributed to every police station, airport, and transportation hub in the country. Financial records were monitored for any activity on accounts connected to her false identities. Known associates from her time at the palace were contacted and questioned, but Victoria seemed to have anticipated this response. She had been planning her activities for months, possibly years, and had taken steps to avoid detection. Her false identities were sophisticated, and she had been careful to pay for everything in cash and avoid creating digital footprints that could be easily traced. As night fell, Coleman remained at the palace, coordinating the search efforts while maintaining a protective presence around Princess Charlotte. The palace had been transformed into a fortress, with security personnel stationed at every entrance and roving patrols covering the grounds. The tension was broken by a call from the hospital where Amanda Stevens was recovering. The journalist had remembered something important about Victoria's plans, a specific date and time when she intended to make contact with Princess Charlotte. "She kept talking about the princess's birthday celebration," Amanda told Coleman over the phone. "She said it would be the perfect opportunity because there would be so many people around, so much confusion. She could blend in with the crowd and get close to Charlotte without being detected." Princess Charlotte's 18th birthday celebration was scheduled for the following weekend, just 4 days away. It was a major public event with hundreds of invited guests, entertainment performers, and support staff. Despite extensive security planning, the sheer scale of the event would create numerous opportunities for someone with insider knowledge to exploit. Coleman realized that they were running out of time. If Victoria Ashworth was planning to make her move at the birthday celebration, they had less than a week to find her or develop a plan to protect Princess Charlotte during the event. The decision was made to use the birthday celebration as a trap. Rather than canceling or postponing the event, which would disappoint the public and potentially drive Victoria further underground, they would proceed with enhanced security measures designed to detect and capture her if she attempted to attend. The plan required careful coordination between multiple agencies. Undercover officers would be positioned throughout the venue, posing as guests, staff, and security personnel. Facial recognition technology would be deployed at all entrances, programmed to identify Victoria Ashworth regardless of any disguises she might attempt. Princess Charlotte was briefed on the plan and given specific instructions for the event. She would be accompanied by additional protection officers disguised as friends and family members. Her movements would be carefully choreographed to minimize exposure while maintaining the appearance of a normal celebration. But even as they prepared these elaborate security measures, Coleman couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Victoria Ashworth had demonstrated sophisticated planning abilities and intimate knowledge of palace procedures. It seemed unlikely that she would walk into such an obvious trap. The answer to this puzzle came from an unexpected source. Thomas Hartwell, reviewing old personnel files from Victoria's time at the palace, discovered that she had been involved in planning several previous royal events. She had intimate knowledge not just of palace security procedures, but of event management protocols and emergency procedures. She would know that we would increase security for the birthday celebration, Hartwell realized. She might be planning something that appears to be a security emergency, something that would require Charlotte to be moved to a supposedly safe location. This possibility changed everything. If Victoria was planning to create a false emergency that would allow her to position herself as Charlotte's protector during an evacuation, then the standard security measures might actually play into her hands. Coleman gathered her team for an emergency briefing as the night wore on. They needed to develop contingency plans for multiple scenarios, including the possibility that Victoria might try to create a situation where she could present herself as part of the solution rather than the threat. She's been thinking about this for months, Coleman told her assembled officers. Every move we've made, every security protocol we've implemented, she's probably anticipated all of it. We need to think several steps ahead of someone who has had unlimited time to plan and who knows our procedures as well as we do. The night passed with little rest for anyone involved in the investigation. Police continued their search for Victoria Ashworth, following up on dozens of reported sightings and potential leads. Most proved to be false alarms, but each one had to be investigated thoroughly in case it led to their suspect. Meanwhile, palace security worked to identify every person who would have access to the birthday celebration venue. Background checks were intensified, and additional screening procedures were implemented for all staff and vendors involved in the event. As dawn approached, Coleman received a call that would change their entire approach to the case. Victoria Ashworth had been spotted at a hotel near the palace, but when police arrived to investigate, they found something that chilled them to the bone. Victoria had checked out of the hotel that morning, but she had left behind a message addressed directly to Princess Charlotte. The message, written in the same elegant handwriting as the anonymous letters, contained a proposal that revealed the full scope of her twisted plan. "My dearest Princess Charlotte," the letter began. "By now you know that I have been watching over you, protecting you from those who would do you harm. The events of recent days were necessary to open your eyes to the dangers that surround you. I am the only one who truly understands what you face, and I am prepared to offer you my protection and loyalty. Meet me tomorrow at sunrise at the place where you feel most at peace. I know you will understand where that is. Come alone, and I will share with you the truth about those who claim to serve your family, but actually seek to harm you. If you do not come, I cannot be responsible for what happens to those you care about. With devoted affection, Victoria." The letter confirmed Coleman's worst fears. Victoria Ashworth wasn't planning to attack the birthday celebration. She was planning to use it as leverage to force Princess Charlotte to meet with her privately. The threat against Charlotte's loved ones suggested that Victoria had identified other targets, possibly members of the royal family or palace staff who could be used to manipulate the princess. Time was running out, and the stakes had just been raised considerably. Victoria Ashworth was no longer just a stalker with delusions. She had become a kidnapper and potential terrorist who was willing to threaten innocent people to achieve her goals. Coleman knew that they were entering the most dangerous phase of the investigation, where one wrong move could result in multiple casualties and a scandal that would rock the monarchy to its foundations. The final day of the investigation began before dawn, with Detective Inspector Coleman and her team implementing the most complex security operation in recent palace history. Victoria Ashworth's letter demanding a sunrise meeting with Princess Charlotte had forced them to accelerate their timeline and prepare for multiple scenarios simultaneously. Princess Charlotte's place of peace that Victoria had referenced could only mean one location: the private riding trails behind Kensington Palace, where Charlotte spent her early mornings with her horses. It was a secluded area, partially wooded, with limited access points that would make it both dangerous for the princess and potentially advantageous for law enforcement. Coleman had spent the night developing a plan that would protect Charlotte while giving them the best chance of capturing Victoria safely. The princess would not actually go to the meeting. Instead, an undercover officer with similar build and coloring would take her place, wearing Charlotte's usual riding attire and using her horse to maintain the illusion from a distance. Meanwhile, Charlotte herself would be secured in the palace's most protected area, surrounded by armed guards and in constant communication with the operation team. The plan was risky, but it offered their best chance of ending Victoria's dangerous obsession without putting the real princess in harm's way. As the sun began to rise, the operation moved into its final phase. The undercover officer, Detective Sergeant Lisa Martinez, had spent hours studying Charlotte's mannerisms and riding style. From a distance, the substitution would be convincing enough to draw Victoria into the open where she could be apprehended. The riding trails were surrounded by concealed police officers, each positioned to provide backup and prevent Victoria from escaping if the confrontation went wrong. Snipers were strategically placed with clear sight lines to the meeting location, though Coleman hoped desperately that they wouldn't be needed. At exactly sunrise, Detective Martinez emerged from the palace stables on Charlotte's favorite horse, following the princess's usual morning route toward the wooded trails. She was equipped with hidden body armor and communication devices, but from a distance, she looked every inch the young royal beginning her daily ride. Victoria Ashworth was waiting in a clearing about half a mile from the palace, positioned where she could see the approaching rider while remaining partially concealed by trees. Coleman watched through binoculars from her command post, noting that Victoria appeared calm and confident, a dangerous sign that suggested she believed her plan was proceeding smoothly. As Martinez approached the clearing, Victoria stepped into view, and Coleman got her first clear look at the woman who had terrorized Princess Charlotte and kidnapped Amanda Stevens. Victoria was elegantly dressed in riding attire that mimicked Charlotte's usual style, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone who belonged in royal circles. Her obsession had led her to literally try to become the person she was stalking. "Your Royal Highness," Victoria called out as Martinez brought the horse to a stop at the edge of the clearing. "I'm so glad you came. I knew you would understand the importance of this meeting." Martinez had been trained in hostage negotiation and undercover work, but this situation required delicate handling. She needed to keep Victoria talking long enough for the surrounding officers to get into position while avoiding saying anything that might reveal her true identity. "You said you had important information to share," Martinez replied, attempting to match Charlotte's accent and speaking pattern. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes bright with an intensity that Coleman found deeply disturbing. "I do indeed. There are people within your own household who mean you harm, people who have been plotting against you for months. I've been watching, protecting you from the shadows, but I can't continue alone." As Victoria spoke, Coleman could see the full extent of her delusion. She genuinely believed that she was Princess Charlotte's protector, that her stalking and criminal activities had been justified acts of service to the royal family. This level of self-deception made her unpredictable and potentially more dangerous than a simple criminal. "What people?" Martinez asked, playing along with Victoria's fantasy. "What have you discovered?" Victoria's expression grew animated as she began describing an elaborate conspiracy that existed only in her imagination. She spoke of palace staff members who were secretly working for foreign governments, of family members who were jealous of Charlotte's popularity, of journalists and photographers who were planning to embarrass the royal family. Coleman realized that Victoria had constructed an entire alternate reality where she was the hero of a complex thriller, saving Princess Charlotte from threats that existed only in her mind. The blood-stained dress, the kidnapping of Amanda Stevens, even this confrontation. They were all part of a narrative that Victoria had created to justify her obsession. But as Victoria continued talking, Coleman noticed something that made her blood run cold. Victoria was wearing a small backpack, and she kept touching it nervously as she spoke. If she was armed or carrying explosives, the situation could turn deadly in seconds. Coleman made the decision to move the operation into its next phase. Using hand signals, she directed her teams to begin closing in on Victoria's position while Martinez kept her distracted with conversation. "I want to help you," Martinez said, still maintaining her role as Charlotte. "But I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Can you show me the evidence you've gathered?" This was the moment Coleman had been hoping for. If Victoria had documents or other materials that explained her activities, it would provide crucial evidence for the prosecution while also revealing whether she had accomplices or other plans in motion. Victoria seemed pleased by this request, interpreting it as validation of her importance. She began to remove items from her backpack, folders filled with photographs, documents, and handwritten notes that chronicled her months of surveillance and planning. But as she reached deeper into the bag, Coleman saw something that made her heart stop. Victoria pulled out what appeared to be a small explosive device, not to threaten Martinez, but to show her what she claimed was evidence of a bomb plot against the royal family. "This is what they were planning to use against you," Victoria said, holding the device carefully. "I intercepted it before they could carry out their attack. This proves that you need my protection." Coleman realized with horror that Victoria had likely created the explosive device herself, as part of her elaborate fantasy about protecting Charlotte from imaginary threats. Whether the device was real or fake, Victoria was clearly unstable enough to use it if she felt cornered. The situation had become critical. Coleman gave the signal for her teams to move in immediately, but she knew that any sudden action could provoke Victoria to violence. Martinez needed to keep the woman calm for just a few more minutes while the officers got into position. "That's very concerning," Martinez said, her training helping her maintain a steady voice despite the obvious danger. "Perhaps we should take this to the authorities together. They need to know about this threat." Victoria's expression suddenly changed, suspicion replacing the previous warmth in her eyes. "The authorities can't be trusted," she said sharply. "Some of them are part of the conspiracy. That's why I had to handle this myself." Coleman could see that Victoria was becoming agitated, possibly realizing that something wasn't right about the situation. If she discovered that she was talking to a police officer instead of Princess Charlotte, there was no telling how she might react. The moment of truth came when Victoria stepped closer to Martinez, studying her face more carefully in the growing daylight. Coleman watched through her binoculars as she saw recognition dawn in Victoria's eyes. "You're not Charlotte," Victoria said, her voice filled with betrayal and rage. "You're police. They sent you to trick me." Martinez knew that her cover was blown, but she continued to play for time. "I'm here to help you," she said. "We all want to resolve this peacefully." But Victoria was beyond reasoning now. The discovery that she had been deceived triggered the complete collapse of her carefully constructed fantasy. If the police were involved, then her imaginary conspiracy had become real in her mind, with herself as the target. "They've turned you against me," Victoria said, backing away while still holding the explosive device. "This proves everything I've been telling you. The conspiracy goes all the way to the top." Coleman made the difficult decision to reveal the positions of her officers before Victoria could harm herself or Martinez. "Victoria, this is Detective Inspector Coleman with the Metropolitan Police. You are surrounded. Please put down the device and step away from the officer." The clearing suddenly filled with armed police officers emerging from concealment, their weapons trained on Victoria, but their expressions showing restraint and professionalism. Coleman had briefed them extensively on Victoria's mental state, emphasizing the need to de-escalate rather than provoke further violence. Victoria stood in the center of the clearing, holding the device against her chest while tears streamed down her face. The collapse of her fantasy world had left her confused and desperate, unable to distinguish between reality and the delusions that had consumed her life. "I was protecting her," Victoria said, her voice breaking. Everything I did was to keep Charlotte safe. Why can't you understand that? Coleman stepped into the clearing, holstering her weapon and approaching Victoria with her hands visible. Her experience with mentally ill suspects told her that Victoria needed help, not punishment, but first they had to ensure everyone's safety.
I believe you thought you were protecting her, Coleman said gently.
But Charlotte was never in danger from the threats you imagined. You've been suffering from an illness that made you see dangers that weren't real. The negotiation that followed was one of the most delicate Coleman had ever conducted. Victoria's grip on reality was tenuous, and any wrong word could trigger a violent reaction. But gradually, through patient conversation and the obvious concern in Coleman's voice, Victoria began to accept that her perceptions might not have been accurate. The moment when Victoria finally surrendered came not from force or threats, but from exhaustion. The months of living in a fantasy world, the stress of her criminal activities, and the shock of having her delusions exposed had drained her completely. She simply sat down in the clearing and placed the device on the ground beside her. Coleman approached carefully and secured the explosive device, which turned out to be functional but crude, more dangerous to Victoria herself than to anyone else. As paramedics and mental health professionals took Victoria into custody, Coleman couldn't help feeling sad for a woman whose untreated illness had led her so far from reality. The aftermath of Victoria Ashworth's capture brought a sense of relief to everyone at Kensington Palace, but also a period of reflection on how such a situation had been allowed to develop. The investigation revealed significant gaps in the palace's procedures for monitoring former employees and detecting potential threats from individuals with mental health issues. Princess Charlotte handled the resolution with remarkable maturity, expressing concern for Victoria's mental health while acknowledging the fear she had experienced during the ordeal. She worked with palace counselors to process the trauma of being stalked and threatened, but she refused to let the experience change her fundamental approach to public service. Amanda Stevens made a full recovery from her injuries and wrote a series of articles about her experience that raised awareness about stalking and its psychological effects on victims. Her investigation into royal family scandals was abandoned in favor of focusing on the very real story of how mental illness and obsession had nearly led to tragedy. The blood-stained dress that had started the entire investigation became evidence in Victoria's trial, where she was sentenced to long-term psychiatric treatment rather than prison. Medical experts testified that her obsession with Princess Charlotte had been driven by a complex combination of mental illnesses that had gone untreated for years. James Morrison, the palace guard whose careful attention to detail had triggered the investigation, received commendation for his quick thinking and professional handling of the initial discovery. The sealed wardrobe in Princess Charlotte's quarters was eventually returned to normal use, though the princess moved to different accommodations while the area was thoroughly renovated. 6 months later, as Princess Charlotte celebrated her 19th birthday, the security measures at the palace had been completely overhauled. New protocols were in place for monitoring former employees, identifying potential threats, and responding to unusual incidents. The princess herself had become an advocate for mental health awareness, using her platform to encourage people to seek help before their problems became overwhelming. The case of the hidden torn dress had ended not with scandal or political intrigue, but with a reminder of how untreated mental illness could destroy lives and endanger innocent people. It was a sobering lesson for everyone involved, but one that ultimately led to important changes in how the royal family approached security and public engagement. Detective Inspector Coleman continued her work with Scotland Yard's Special Crimes Unit, but the case of Victoria Ashworth remained one that she thought about frequently. It had shown her how quickly someone's grip on reality could slip, and how important it was to recognize the warning signs before fantasy became dangerous action. The palace returned to its normal routines, but with a new appreciation for the delicate balance between openness and security that defines modern royal life. Princess Charlotte continued her charitable work and public duties, but with enhanced awareness of the complex motivations that could drive people to extreme behavior. In the end, the mystery of the blood-stained dress had been solved not through dramatic confrontations or political revelations, but through careful investigation, professional dedication, and a commitment to understanding the human psychology behind criminal behavior. It was a victory for law enforcement and mental health awareness, even as it served as a sobering reminder of how quickly admiration could become obsession, and how important it was to recognize and treat mental illness before it led to tragedy.